Okay, Jared Callahan, welcome. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Just to get started, you're a filmmaker, right? Um,
I am.
Tell me about your. We're going to talk about Clean Slate, which is a documentary. Tell me about like your history as a filmmaker up until that point of making that film.
Well, I got into it in high school. I started filming skateboard movies. I would hang out with my friends and my brother, who was better than I was, and we'd get to a spot where I couldn't do any skateboarding tricks, but I could hold the camera. And I think that was right about the time of Jackass, so it was very common to film hijinks and whatnot. And I loved it. I edited a film and sold it to my friends in high school. And in college, I, excuse me, studied media communication and production and fell in love with movie making. So I've been making films with friends for a long time and did another job for about a decade, and then moved into full-time filmmaking and running a production company in 2014. So this film is now on the list of many films that follow interesting people who are different than me, who I can learn from about the world and their existence. And the exercise of filmmaking for me is a process in growing myself. So
Okay, great. And th this film is about addiction and rehab, and we were just talking about it. And I'm going to be completely honest from the start. I haven't seen it. I should have seen it. And
you will see it. You'll see it.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to watch it, and if possible, maybe we can do a follow-up after I've seen it, and catch up after that. But it's about, or at least it sounds like you intended to make a one kind of film, and something happened along the way, and your plans changed completely, and you weren't sure if you could still pull it together, and then you did pull it together. So
Yeah.
yeah, tell us
The
a little bit about
project in
that.
and of itself is really wild. I was speaking at the Atlanta Film Festival with another film, and I was on a panel about, I think, how to make your podcast or how to make your documentary, right? Like how to do it. Documentary 101. And I got approached by a couple of guys afterwards who wanted to pitch me a film, and that never works out. You just say, "Thanks, I'm busy." And one of them was Cassidy. So we went out to coffee, and what I thought was going to be an hour was 2.5 hours of hearing his life story. And it was amazing. I was in. And so I agreed to come visit their residential recovery facility. It was a place where, at the time, I don't know, 60 or so men were some there by choice, trying to get sober, and others were court mandated. And that created a really interesting dynamic to avoid a longer prison sentence. They would go serve their language 18 months to get sober at this facility. And when I went, again, I thought I was going to do an hour, and I did a 6.5 hour tour. I saw all of their locations and their houses for the men and the businesses that they're running to get the guys job experience so they could get sober and get job experience. It was really incredible. And I started mentoring what they at the time intended to be a film company. They wanted 4 or 5 guys to learn how to make movies and to start working in the movie industry. They are located right by Pinewood, Georgia, near Atlanta, where they make, every huge movie, the Hunger Games and Spider-Man and Avengers movies. It's just the biggest movies in the world, and they're neighbors. And so they had the bug. They wanted to do it. And as I started working with them, and we wrote a feature script, and as making films go, it wasn't possible for them to make a long one. They wanted to make a short one. And I realized, oh, the story isn't the resulting short film, although it exists and you can see that. The story is these guys trying to make the movie. So as life in recovery is, it's ups and downs. Every day can be completely different. And by following Josh and Cassidy as the main characters, the resulting story in the movie Clean Slate that we made is really wild.
Okay, so Clean Slate is a documentary about these guys in rehab learning about how to make a movie.
Yeah, they
Oh,
are.
wow.
I think it's in the trailer. Josh says it. Making movies is hard enough, but making movies in recovery is impossible. And he laughs like a very knowing laugh. What I've learned now, spending 5 years in a deep relationship with people in and the community of focusing on recovery, they are they laugh the hardest. They are a group of people who laughs so deeply and so hard. And then at the same time, maybe it's the other side of the same coin, they're a group that could cry so hard, so fast. And I asked Josh one time, and he basically said, he thought for a second, and he said, well, if we didn't laugh every day, we would cry every day. And I think that there, something about that community is vulnerability and honesty, because you could shine it on. There are people there who are just trying to serve the 18 months and get out of there without ever letting it go deep. But in order to be fully in recovery, you're admitting, your presence there admits that something didn't go as planned, right? Like
Yeah.
your being there meant that at some point in your life, probably pretty recently, it got out of control. And if you're honest with that, as many people in recovery or not could and should be, it led to this genuine relationships that bonded other people together very quickly. And it made for a great environment for telling story, because people, like I said, would laugh and cry very hard. They're open with us, which many people who'd want to be on a film or wouldn't want to be on a film because they don't want to be filmed and let people in. And then many people who would want to be filmed, as soon as there's a camera in your face, that stuff dries up. It shuts down. You don't have the ability to be honest. But this group is a practiced group in honesty and vulnerability and sharing things that are difficult, and that led to the resulting film Clean Slate being really, really special.
Well, that's great. I was wondering, did you know anything about addiction recovery before you went there? Like, were you already familiar with how that works?
After our time there, and I think I might have could have said it before, but now I believe it, is that everybody knows someone who's in recovery or who should be, if
Yeah.
they shouldn't be in recovery themselves. The topic hits everybody, and for me, it's an abusive grandfather, alcoholic abusive grandfather, and cousins and friends, but the knowledge never went as deep as it does now. I was in close relationship for a long time, and through the course of production and post-production became an enabler. I had a relationship where I cared and loved people that were relapsing, and then would try to help and become a rescuer myself, which is not my role. There are times where I fell into trying to become family member for them when I'm not, and become a social worker for them when I'm not, and be a therapist for them when I'm not, and to be hurt and get to the point where tough love means you have to cut someone off because they've literally stolen your camera equipment and sold it for drug money. So I've been in a pawn shop trying to get back my film gear because I chose to work on this project. And so I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's the people matter. The what I've learned is them telling themselves in the mirror, which Cassidy does some in this movie, because I put the cameras in the hands of the men we were working with. They were filmmakers. So I thought it would really work to have some of the footage come back from them and be their story direct without my interpretive lens on it. And sometimes it's Cassidy standing in the mirror, filming himself, talk to himself in the mirror and say, "You're worth it. You're worth it. I'm worth it. You're worth it today. I can do it today. I can do it today." And so, yeah, it is way more deep now than it was before. I was definitely a rookie before, and now I am, step 3 around a track that's running a marathon that people have experienced in the world of recovery and on the road to sobriety.
Yeah. So yeah, that's one of the most difficult parts of recovery, that early stage where a person is just not ready for it. Um, and just almost nothing is going to convince them to get started. Uh,
Yeah.
and
Discovering rock bottom is very hard. I think like you can put on what for someone else, oh, this is rock bottom. Oh, they're gonna learn now. They're gonna get it now. And what I learned there is you can't know that sometimes till they've come through it, what actually is rock bottom, because they'll continue to discover another level down to fall and pain to cause themselves and others. And the two characters, Cassidy and Josh, who you'll get to know and fall in love with in Clean Slate, we're very clear that the character shouldn't be trying to get sober for someone else. That it doesn't work when you're trying to get sober for your kids, you're trying to get sober for a partner, that those things fall away too. And the voice of addiction is very loud. And sometimes when you're alone, they're very quiet, but they're the only voice. So they're still very loud in your head and they will steer you. And now I've done enough relationship with Josh and Cassie and some of the other men that there are times with one of them in particular, they were talking to me and I could see the face and see the name and see the clothes and know the person. But what I later learned was talking to me was actually the addiction, where they would burn anything. I think Josh said at one point, if we could sell our grandma out for drugs, we would. Like, I'd betray my grandma, my sweet, sweet grandma. And I realized that's what was talking to me. It was the voice of addiction, and the conniving to get the next fix was what was controlling the person that I loved. And I wouldn't have answered it or said it or understood it that way. before. And now I can fully say, yeah, that was not the person I know to be talking to me. That was the addiction was in control at that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, a person in active addiction is not really themselves. You can't really hold them accountable later for everything and say, you said some really bad things and it's not really that person, They're like but yeah, and addiction is like really like a brilliant creature because it's like, it's like almost like a sci-fi parasite. It, burrows into the person's brain and uses their best abilities to an extreme, like if whatever person's capabilities would be at their best is what addiction takes and is able to do it. And the only goal is put the person and the drugs together,
Yep.
and that's it. And
That's it.
it's very good at it too.
It's
Uh,
very good at it. I don't know if you've seen The Last of Us on HBO. It's a show that's sweeping the nation. I'm only 4 episodes in, halfway through, but it's not a spoiler. But the thing that takes over them all, makes them like a zombie apocalypse, is fungus, a fungi, a mushroom. That it's a pandemic, but it gets into people's bodies and does exactly that. It controls them, and you can see it. And I think that that's the thing with addiction. Sometimes you can't. In The Last of Us, you can say, "Oh, that person's infected," and you know to get away from them. But the thing about addiction is that it's all internal. And there are some external signs that can show themselves depending on where you're at in addiction and what you're using. But there are things you can hide. And the people that I was with, you don't know. And they can be, I mean, they, in the film early, they have a friend that disappears. He's like, well, turns out he was doing crystal meth for weeks and we didn't know. And that's in their lives and that's happening to them regularly. And they know that they can. The addiction says, and their experience says that they can do that if they need to do that. So getting sober or being on the road of recovery, they make sure we learn that it's not uh, like you don't arrive. It's a perpetual journey. That the journey is always different, but you need to treat it as such. That it's not a place that you arrived at sobriety. It's a journey of sobriety, and that was very helpful language for me to understand.
yeah, yeah. That's one thing I've seen in my medical practice of treating addiction was, and this is really an interesting thing to see that uh, a person came in with a family member to try to help them get clean from opioids, and uh, and this family member was very much involved in recovery, in Narcotics Anonymous, and had worked the steps and had a sponsor, and was kind of disapproving of this whole medical treatment for addiction, but brought their family member and anyway, so things went fine. We did the medical treatment, things went well, and I think eventually he moved on, left the area, had found another doctor to continue. Well, the person who brought them in, and I'm trying not to give too much any information in any way, keeping them anonymous. Um, the person who was in NA and recovery and was disapproving the medical treatment, was like the kind of the good one, came back now after a relapse and was a whole different person, and
Mm.
and couldn't find their way to recovery through the whole course of me seeing them over like several months. um Struggled with it and would make excuses and say, oh, I messed up again, I ended up back at the drug dealer and ended up you know I, and there was excuse after excuse, and I'm gonna get
Mm.
it this time, this is the last time, I'm definitely gonna get it this time. And it was really unusual to see that transformation, because normally we don't see that. We don't see someone doing well. I mean, we do. I mean, people do relapse, but um, just to see them as an outsider, as a family member, doing really well, and kind of high up on, high on NA, and like, it's really great. I'm doing well. I got
Yeah.
a sponsor. I'm not like my family member here that I brought in, and seeing them, the whole thing turned around, and and then they were in that position of not being ready, of nothing was going to work, no matter how much medical treatment, therapy, um and finally the family just said, we're going to take them back home and put them in rehab.
Mm.
And I don't know what happened after that, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I feel like the excuses are that addiction would say to you are very good and very convincing. And what I saw in both Josh and Cassidy is they're in different places in on the road to recovery. But Cassidy at one point is having struggles, couldn't get a job because of his record, and he just is basically frustrated and wants to get high. And he borrows a camera and he goes out to take pictures in the woods. And he says, as he's setting up the tripod to take a picture, he just says, well, I want to get high. I know I could, but my problems will just still be here tomorrow. And so instead, I'm going to do this instead. And he takes a photograph. And I feel like I've come to understand recovery and staying sober as kind of like spokes on a wagon wheel, right? It's not one thing. You need a community, and you need a mentor, and you need to be mentoring someone, and you need medication, and you need a therapist, and you need like, and you also, I think one of the things I'm learning is a good spoke for many people is art. You need a place to express yourself. And there's a system and all these things that can keep you and encourage you and catch you when something else doesn't, or work for you when something isn't. But many of the people that I was working with is they needed to write or paint or act or tell a story, or a way to also get those things that if they stay inside of you can just start to fester and poison you. And it's just another avenue for them to come out in a healthy and productive way. And I think the goal for making Clean Slate in a lot of ways, once we got to know them, was to add empathy to people, both who need it for themselves, because like that, they're on the vicious cycle, or for the people who are family members or close loved ones of people, because you've been abused by that. You've been beat up by that. And we've seen it. And now we've been a little of that. And we know the family members, and they all speak in the film. We showed the film, we were doing test screening because we showed it to a lot of people in recovery to say, this isn't your truth, but is this kind of capital T truth? Does this hit the world? And the feedback was great. It was like, wow, you know, many Hollywood films Hollywoodize the world of recovery, and it's a plot device or get somewhere. And we feel seen by your film, right? It deals with mental health and recovery in a very real way. But one of the things that surprised us was how much the film resonated with people who were enablers, family members, loved ones. And someone came up to us. It wasn't even a recovery specific screening. She was probably early 60s, mid 60s, and just was crying and said, my brother has been working through recovery for a long time. And about 10 years ago, we cut him out of our family because it was the only option we had left. But this film makes me understand what my brother's going through, and I want to forgive my brother. And I'm going to show the film to my parents because I think it can reconcile our family. And I was just like, so you liked it? Like, that's what I was thinking, is like, we're here asking, like, is the movie too long? Is it too short? What, were you ever confused? And the response while we were still working on the film was, this changed my life. And that for me, really, before the film was even finished, was the success of the film. Is it resonates with people, and people at any stage in that feel seen. And I think that that is a real testament to the power of film and art, is that you can express your truth most deeply, and that in doing that, both it's good for you. It was good for Josh and Cassidy, the main characters, subject collaborators of Clean Slate, but it's good for the people who then can receive that and have some part of them that was hidden and they were not yet willing to either see or share, and it opens it up in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it almost sounds like a, you know, maybe a form of family therapy for some people. And family therapy is a really important part of recovery, assuming that family isn't, you know, to an extreme a part of the problem, you know. But in a lot of cases, bringing families together and communicating is important. But you know, for someone to sit there, you know, in rehab, and then, you know, say their mother walks in and says, "Okay, tell me what's going on. We're here for family therapy." You're like, well, it's just too much to talk about, you know.
Yeah.
You know, you were part of the issue growing up, and now here I am in rehab, and you wouldn't possibly understand. And I want to tell you, I had needles in my arm and whatever off on the street, and you know, it's just too much to, you know. But now here's a film that with other people's voices telling their story, and you
Yeah.
can say like, here, let's watch this together first, and then talk.
Yeah.
Um,
That's how it spread so far. I thought, and we were trying, it's still available for anybody who hears this, to play at a recovery group or show to a meeting that you, or the people in your life that matter. The ways that it spread the most has been that family to family, that people who are in the relationship core circle see it, and that is where it's spreading, which is so interesting to us. You make a thing to honor the story, to follow the story, to honor Josh and Cassidy and all the people who are vulnerable in the film, and to tell it most honestly. Like, we want to hold a mirror up to where anybody, no matter what you believe or think about it, you could see it and understand it better. And kind of in one of those target audience people that I always think about is this, you know, subject collaborators, but also like my mom. She's a mid-60s person, just with a perm, you know, PE teacher type person. And if you had asked my mom before she saw the movie, what does she think of someone who has an addiction or has a felony, she'll give you a description, and that has been formed somewhere. She didn't come up with that herself. That's been formed by media and all the different things that she's absorbed, and she would describe to you probably socioeconomic class, a skin color, probably, like she'd have some thoughts. But if she sees Clean Slate and comes to love Josh and Cassidy, and then at the end of the film you say, so would you be friends with Josh and Cassidy? Yeah. Would you hire them if you could hire them? Yeah. Should they be able to vote? Yeah. Would you let them babysit your kids? Yeah. Do you know that they have felonies? She now see, now we've taken the story and we're uh encountering, not confronting, but encountering, challenging is the right word, her pre-held conceptions of what people are or who they are. And as soon as you love the people, then you can have a different understanding of what addiction is, and what a felony is, and what the road of recovery is actually like. So if in any way, it's a big, complex, as you know, you've had these conversations with so many people, it's a big, big, big thing. And everybody's story is different. Every single person struggling with this is similar in some ways, but very different. And if Clean Slate, the film, can join that conversation and add a tool to people's tool belt as they need to understand themselves, as they need to move down the process of sobriety themselves, or they need to communicate to their friends and family what it's like going on in their head or in their day-to-day, then I would be honored. And the 5 years of working on this film are years well spent, time well spent, because we just want to honor people's journeys and help in any way we can. And Clean Slate is definitely a way that has done that so far.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really an important thing to change people's perception wherever possible. It reminded me of we were on a trip and we were in Seattle for this as part of a vacation, and we were in a large group kind of walking around the city looking at things. And at the time they're having a major homeless problem. We found out later it was because there was something going on where they pushed everybody out of the tents that were out of, like on the fringes of the city. So everyone's, just kind of running around downtown, and all kinds of weird things going on. And like, so we were all kind of comparing notes on different things we'd seen. And someone in the group said, well, I saw like something you wouldn't believe. It was like worse than anything. I saw someone shooting up in an alley. And so, I mean, our perceptions of that are completely different. I thought like a person shoot up in an alley, that could be a patient. That's like that could be a great person. I mean, I see them as a whole different thing, that like from her perception, that's like, like the bottom of the barrel, worst possible behavior you could see it. I'm like, that's someone I could relate to. I can work with them probably. Um, and have you seen the old Superman movie from like 1980 or whatever with Christopher Reeve?
Oh yeah, probably a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a scene, and I've talked about this before. I always think about that. There's a scene where Superman is like in Lex Luthor's lair, which is like a big thing in the subway, like a hidden giant mansion that was like probably an old subway tunnel or something, or station. And and so Lex Luthor gets to the point where he gets kryptonite close enough to Superman. He like puts this chain necklace with a big kryptonite rock around his neck, and Superman is like almost passed out on the ground, like barely able to talk. He's like on the verge of death, and Lex Luthor laughs and walks away, and leaves him there to die. And I always think, like, if he didn't have the Superman suit on and he was like in a back alley, somebody would probably walk by and say, "Oh, look at that junkie! How pathetic." I mean, I wonder what he did to get there.
Hmm.
Not realizing, like, if you just took that thing off his neck, that Superman, he could save the world. Um, and I kind of see people in, active addiction like that. If we could just figure out how to get that kryptonite off of them, I mean, they could do incredible things.
That's really good. And again, it's a movie providing the metaphor for people to understand, and for you to be able to share to someone who sees that. Really, it comes down to education. So it's empathy, education, understanding. And as soon as you understand and have someone in your life, then like now I see it completely different than I did before. And I think that is a huge part of change. That, I mean, there's laws that we'd like to change. There's drug availability that we'd like to change. There's like, big pharma stuff we'd like to change. There's all kinds of things to change. But while we're also in those areas trying to make those changes, I think it helps to show a film like this or have these conversations with people like my mom or people who see this film, because that is also change. And so I feel like it's top down, but it's also bottom up. And I think that they're understanding that both are important and need each other is a great way to approach the world of recovery. and basically hope, right? Like for these guys, it came down to, and the art often was one of the spokes that could keep them going, was hope. Today's going to be okay, right? And tomorrow's going to be okay. Because as soon as they lost hope, then the spiral would go faster, right? Or you could fall really fast to the voice. The voice was always there in some way. Just sometimes it was loud, and sometimes they could put it to the back or to the side, or silence it, put the mute on for a little while. But having hope and knowing that their life was worth it, or that there was some Superman in them trying to get out, was integral to their success.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was also thinking, when you think of something like, this film, you take this film as a, I still imagine like an old VHS tape when I think of a film, but, you think of it as a tool you could put in a toolbox, and people talk about in recovery, having tools for recovery, and they share their tools in meetings, this is what worked for me. And someone says, well, this worked for me. And people put these things together and collect all these different things that work for them, and whatever
Mm.
doesn't work for them, they can leave behind. Um, and so people start thinking about, I start thinking like, how could you take this tool and use it in different ways where you might not have intended, which sounds like is already happening. Um,
Yeah.
and, I'm imagining like this could be like required watching in a doctor's office, like in my office, tell people, when families come in and they're like, I don't know what to do. I want you to treat my son. We can't do anything with him. Maybe you can figure out something. And I'm like, well, I don't think I will be able to. I mean, I'll try it. I'm happy you can pay and bring him in. We'll talk to him for an hour, and he'll probably
Hmm.
go out and do the same thing, but hopefully not. Um, Now I have a new tool now. I
Yeah.
didn't even know it existed until now. Now look, here's an incredible film you could watch, and this might open your eyes to how things really are, and you might get some ideas yourself about what's going on with your son's addiction, and what the next step might be for you, and how you relate to each other. So, and then you think of like there's rehabs, or there's these new online addiction programs that treat people over the phone. Um, I mean, there's so many places where this could be an incredible resource.
That's so good. Tools are only as good as your knowledge how to use them, right? And your
Yeah,
willingness to use them. We can have all the tools, but if I don't know what a hammer is, having a hammer isn't helpful. But if I know what it can do, then it makes a big difference. And my willingness to use it, big time. Like you said, the new tools that people have access to, some of them are coming because the pandemic was so hard. I saw that with this community. This is a group that needs each other and thrives on having people. And if all of a sudden multiple spokes are removed from your sobriety wheel because you can't be together or can't meet regularly with people, it's very hard. It's very hard.
yeah,
I feel like anybody hearing this that had a hard pandemic or still is coming back from that, grace for yourself is a huge first step to move you to realizing like it's you're not what you were yesterday, you're not what you were an hour ago. What are you now, and what are you going to be? And using understanding what the tools are, adding Clean Slate as one of them, and then using every tool as you need it is the best advice. And then hope that people could have, that they would have hope themselves, that they wouldn't beat themselves up for a thing of the past. That's what I've learned too. And these guys and other people in my life is the most healthy they are is when they're most the most forgiving of themselves. The more grace you can have for yourself, the better you'll do today.
yeah,
And that's one of the things that I've learned that's been constantly true in all situations, for sure.
yeah, yeah. That's a good point. And the spiritual connection is definitely important. And I think,
Right. Yeah. This was a religious
yeah,
community that we were filming with, which is really interesting because non-religious and religious people, you would have different opinions about what they're doing, not in a blanket slate, like, oh, you're going to be higher power focused. Because I know there are many that do a non-higher power focused, which has been great to talk about the film with them too, about the things they see that resonate and the things that don't, tools that don't work for them. And uh, I think these guys, it has worked and not worked in different ways. And the core that keeps drawing them back is the people. It's the people side of it. And good people who are committed to you and themselves and to doing the work and honesty. So whether that be religious or not, this film at times was more because I was like, wow, it's a big part of what they're doing. And then by the end film, uh, it is important and integral to the story of telling honestly about who the people we are with, but it's not needed for people to get and see the film. It's more of like an anthropological like look at what they're doing and seeing it rather than it is being a commercial for any right way or one way. And I'm really proud of that too. I like that it doesn't
Yeah.
become a commercial for it. And so at the end, go sign up for this brand or this flavor. It's a portrait of specifically Josh and Cassidy and their attempt in this season of life at this place. As Josh says, like some people can get sober the first time. My grandpa cold turkey got sober, but for me, I think he says something like, "This is my 13th or 14th time at a recovery center," and he just says it in passing, and you go, "Wait, what? This is your 14th attempt at a recovery center?" So everybody's story is different,
Yeah.
but the non-judgmental look at any of it is definitely the gateway
Yeah.
to health for sure.
That's never a nice thing when someone says like, well, why do you have to go to 20 rehabs and I just quit cold turkey? Or someone says, why do you have to take medication? I didn't have to take medication.
Right.
It's a disease that has a lot of different manifestations and different levels of severity. Um, it wouldn't be nice for a person with diabetes who's well controlled to tell another person like, I don't know why you keep losing legs and stuff. I mean, I got my legs. I mean, it's
Right.
just not a nice thing because there are different kinds of this one disease manifest in a lot of different ways. So um, one thing you brought up about art, when people think about art therapy and rehab, I think you imagine like a room full of people kind of painting like really bad paintings and whatever, and trying to express themselves, or maybe they do some step work. They're like, draw a picture of your higher power. What does a higher power look like to you? And everyone draws this, the picture of God or something else if they want to be creative. Um, but I think what you said is important, like that there's different, in creation, being able to create something and make something, I think is an important part of recovery, and a lot of people with addiction are creative people. That's probably, that's the thing, like we are saying, the addiction hijacks their mental facilities, and creativity is a great way to get drugs, so those people have a harder time getting out of it. And that's another thing I've noticed, that the people that have the hardest time getting clean or sober or whatever, that they tend to be the more intelligent, creative people, because addiction is using their best abilities against them. Um, but yeah, creativity, making something that you made is great, and art therapy doesn't have to be painting, and and filmmaking is a great thing, whether it's music, filmmaking. But it also reminded me of a therapy that some people do of where they take a baby picture of themselves, and they carry the baby picture around, and they look at it all the time. They start to fall in love with the baby version of themselves, and that's apparently therapeutic, for a person. They learn to love themselves by loving themselves as a baby. Um, and maybe it sounds like almost something similar, like that you can document your journey, but also maybe uh, be able to look back at yourself of like when you were getting better, when you were doing well, and maybe fall in love with like the real version of yourself by having it documented properly. Um,
Mm.
so there's a lot of interesting stuff, therapeutic stuff in there, of being able to create, learn how to create, also learning a trade, and also documenting your journey, and having something you can look back at, when you're having a difficult time.
Yeah, that is a creative way to do high level work. I mean, working on your childhood self and your wounded self and our shadow self and the parts of us that were hurt and why before we could even register that language as a child, and then how much of our current behavior is acting to negate that or counter that. Where I was, shy as a kid, or I was embarrassed, and therefore I developed the ability to be a class clown or a great speaker too. Like everything we're doing is in response to something that comes from before. And so I think that's great to go all the way back before any of that stuff was added on to us, to say, you are worthy of love. Like you are a little being that is as equal and as worthy as any other person. And so any of the stuff that has been added on to us, not by choice, or that we've brought into our lives, or that addiction has brought, is not does not define you, and is not the sum of your parts, is not the whole of your value. I think it's great. Putting our value, for me, it's achiever. It's always like wanting to produce and wanting to, I don't know who I'm trying to seek approval from. I don't think it was my parents, but somewhere in me, the need to be and the need to achieve and the need to build things is so hard on me. I drown in it. And so I think for me to be able to look, like you're saying, back to the beginning and say, I'm worth it whether I make something or not today. I'm worth it whether or not I do check things off a to-do list. And for all of us, it's a different thing. And as soon as you're doing the work on opioids, as soon as something like that can grab a chemical hook in you, then as soon as I mean, you're done. You're on the road, because I would be too. And I think that's what Clean Slate does as well, is it you just see it's not, oh, if they could just make better decisions. It's like, no, that's not it at all. It's that I too have that in me and would easily do that. If I have Josh's story or Cassidy's story, I guarantee you I would be where they are. Guarantee it.
Yeah.
And we don't hear those stories ever. You don't hear those stories. And for them, you hear those stories before you've come to a judgment and put other stories on them. And you hear their stories and go, oh. And I think that might do the same thing for people, both for themselves and for their loved ones to see, as it gives you more of the whole story. And hopefully opens people who use the film as a tool up to the same benefit, to see the whole story and be seen as the whole, the baby, not all the things added on top. That's really good for you to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people with addiction issues, that if you were to look at their whole life, maybe lay it out as like a strip of white paper, and then put like little lines like wherever the points in their life where they had addiction problems, they were an active addiction, add it all up together. The for a lot of people, the good productive years and the positive times probably way outnumber the addiction. And so, yeah, sometimes family members, look at their family member, they look at their loved one, they're like, oh, look, you're an addict. It's been all
Right.
bad. It's like, well, no, can you please look at all the other stuff? It's not all bad. Um, so, but yeah, and as far as like choices that people make at some point, and what contributes to how a person ends up going into either being addicted to drugs or addicted to something else, or maybe being really successful at something. It reminds me of that movie, that Taxi Driver with Robert De Niro,
Yeah.
and I don't know if I interpreted the movie incorrectly, but I always see it as like he was determined to shoot someone. He just had somebody had to die. He had to shoot someone. He was going to shoot a politician, and in the end, he ends up shooting a pimp drug dealer. And either one was going to make him a criminal, and one made him a hero. And it could have gone either way. It was just by the chance that the politician was a little bit harder because they were watching more closely. And
Right.
so yeah, in the end, the parents are, I forgot, I think you hear him reading a letter or something like thank you for saving our daughter from a life of prostitution or whatever. It's like he was a hero just because he shot the right person. It's like, people make these decisions growing up, and you ended up as a filmmaker, and someone ended up as a heroin addict or something. And maybe it was like the same kind of motivation that led in either direction, and it was just by chance or by making one decision or the other that each person ends up where they are.
Yeah. For the Josh and Cassidy, it came down to a lot of using what you have in the moment, right? Like what hand were you dealt? How did you play it? And if
Yeah.
you play poker for any amount of time, you lose a lot of hands. And it's about taking advantage when you can, seeing what you've got, and being honest with yourself, right? Like playing smart. And I
Yeah.
think it's the same thing. Like comparing yourself to people who have better cards doesn't help you at all.
Yeah.
And I could hear it. Maybe he didn't ever use that analogy, but I could hear it in Josh's voice, especially about like being fed up with being less than he could be, and being fed up with the process, and being on the hamster wheel of relapse recovery. And I think that was the same thing that you're saying there. It was the understanding that it could end, should end, and that he had the power to have it end, and he was ready for it to be done. And the voice was hollow. The voices and the excuses that were said weren't providing help or the way out, or were fake. And I think that those things, some people can get it right, like you said, some people can get it right away, and some people that can take forever to figure out. And I know for Josh, no spoilers for how it ends after the movie for any of them, but there is hope. There's hope, and I've seen it work, and I've seen it continue to be hard for different people, but there's hope.
Yeah. Would it be a spoiler to say like what a drug addiction that each one was dealing with?
Oh no, all of it. Yep, everything. Like
Okay.
opioids, fentanyl. They mention it. We made a decision early that we weren't going to show drug use in the film because of that Hollywoodization. We never, even if or as relapse came, because my year there before we started filming, I realized how often drug use was prevalent. We made the decision to not show them using drugs exactly for that, because we didn't want anybody to be able to say, oh, well, they're doing, oh, well, if you did, you could do this different. But they all say their drug of choice. They mention having done fentanyl Yeah.
Yeah.
it,
I mean, I think even
it was they're both in their early 30s, and
yeah,
their life at that point was readily saying we've done it all. We've done it all.
yeah,
So.
yeah. I think even in rehab, like there's kind of like a hierarchy and bickering over who's a more distinguished drug addict than the other.
Oh
There's
my
a
God, they would make
yeah,
comments, and it's in the trailer because it was so gnarly. They were driving to the DMV to try and get a license reinstated, which is so common for so many of them. And Josh says like, "Well, yeah, I was dead for like 8 minutes," and the guy in the back seat said, "Well, yeah, I was shot and I was dead for like 10." And that was a con. They laughed, and
yeah,
wait, what? What did you both just share and one up each other on what you said? Like it was,
yeah,
it was like that was, and that was so normal to them. But yeah, like their understanding of crystal meth, heroin, like they would just say pills, like they would just say things like, yeah, that was me.
yeah,
What's your DOC? What's your drug of choice? And they would just say that thing as a way almost of validating that they all fit in the room. But I never saw it turn into necessarily like a pissing contest of like who had done what and how much. But their
yeah.
stories could let you know very quickly what was happening, right? And there were a
But
couple people who are weed and cocaine and stuff, but then also that attaches to alcohol really quick, and you're like, oh, that's a whole nother beast, different than these, but also equally as gnarly as a monster to be trying to get sober from. So yeah, they were
yeah,
on things that they could have met you and been helped by your treatment of opioid work for sure.
yeah, yeah. There's well, one thing that also happens is that you have like the people that use powder cocaine will like kind of look down on the crack smokers,
Mm-hmm.
and then then there's the people like the old timers that'll say like, oh well, I smoked it, but it was real freebase. It wasn't that crack stuff you guys are buying. And then
Right.
you have like the pill people that are like, well, we were real pain patients. We were doing it legally and we had actual pain problems. And so you get these different groups in rehab that separate out.
No, you're so right. Yeah, there's like a socioeconomic thing in there because like cocaine and crack, that was just a money thing and availability and what was sold in your area. That wasn't like it's not like anybody was making a choice
Yeah,
that we should be segregating the groups on. But you're so right. And we're tribalist people, right? Like we do it safely in some ways with baseball teams, right? Like it's one thing to wear one color and then just automatically hate everybody wearing the wrong color. But I think we do that in so many ways to find not that we need the other, but we need our people. We need to find people who get us. And I see that in those circles too. Like if I find people who are also doing what I did, pill people have something, like you said, even more in
yeah,
common with people who are going to get me and get it. And so there's definitely some of that, but I think they can segregate themselves over a ton of other stuff too. Probably
yeah,
who's working out and buff and who's not, and
yeah,
who's creative and who's not, and who likes music and who's not. Like
yeah.
they form their little groups even within it because you need friends. You can't be close friends with 60 plus people. You need a people. So Josh and Cassidy and a couple other people in the film area also were doing that. They were uniting in just like you, being able to reference movies and stories and things that connected and resonated and shaped them is wildly important to find other people like you who have that too.
Yeah, and the thing about opioids, I mean, the opioids are really um, kind of a different problem because, like, when you hear people talking about in recovery saying, "Oh, I just buried another friend passed away," um, and all the drugs can kill. I mean, people obviously can die from cocaine, methamphetamine, definitely alcohol. Well, alcohol is a big killer actually, but um, by far, I think like 10 times more. Opioids are far bigger killers than the other drugs, and alcohol is way up there also. Although probably maybe with fentanyl, the opioids are a much bigger killer. But when you talk to people and say, have I ask this question sometimes, do you know anybody who ever died from cocaine or amphetamines? And they might say like, well, I know this guy had a heart attack, that guy had a stroke, but he's still alive. He's getting better. Not too many people know people that died of these other drugs, but everybody, when they say they know people who have died, it's always opioids. It seems like it always is. I mean, they're just like really super deadly and almost seems commonplace. Everybody knows someone that died from an opioid overdose. And, it's just a whole different thing that we have to be aware of, like of harm reduction and getting more naloxone out there to reverse overdoses. And, so I'm sure you saw a lot of that about the severity of people that have died and known people that have died from opioid overdose.
Yep. When the story that they were writing, and I was coaching them, and we were writing it together. well, I was doing the writing and we were on note cards and stories and they were telling stories. That definitely is a main crux of it, is who's at fault, and who's at fault, and is the person who did the drugs, is the person who provided the drugs. Having someone die of opioid addiction was crucial to the way that they were thinking of the whole story as the way it needed to be told, because it's so common. So yeah,
Yeah.
crushing and sad. I'm thankful that there's all these ways that people are working and combating and trying to approach this. I like the other media that's happening. There are people trying to tell those stories. Dope Sick was on Hulu and people raved about it and entered into the story because Caitlin Deaver and Michael Keaton, was that no? I
Yeah.
think he was
Yeah. I think
Batman.
Michael Keaton was
Yeah,
in it. Yeah.
yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. So that's the most famous people. They're the best. And if they're telling these stories and showing people fight them, there are ways in to access and understand a story that many people would never approach. But these people are working and telling stories that create avenues for people to understand. So I'm grateful that Clean Slate could do that. I'm grateful that Josh and Cassidy were so honest with their story and so forthright. Many people will never do that and don't have the courage to do that. And even if they had the courage or the availability, just couldn't pull it off. And these guys really did something that is really special and that they should be really proud of. And I know they are. I know the way it's been received and the way people are giving them feedback has just been, it's really something that in the middle of one of those, like you said, a white strip of paper that has some dark lines. It's really interesting that even in a strip that has some dark lines in it, that you could do something that you see as being positive is an interesting mess with your brain that you would want to write off as worthless, but you also now see the way that honestly telling our stories and having a community can bring others and yourself to some benefit, some health is really,
Yeah.
really powerful.
Yeah. And you really can look back and, like they say, connect the dots and say like, wow, all these bad things, they turned into something good. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, this could really, I mean, and going forward, those guys may look back and say, wow, this was really a great thing. Really led to positive ways of, new opportunities and new ways to help other people. Um, so yeah, that's, then you look back on all those dark times, you're like, maybe those weren't really dark spots on the paper. My family might see it that way, but maybe, you know, that's actually all good stuff, really when you put it together.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like your experience in the world lends you to be able to have this conversation, not having seen it. And you're spot on. You get it. You get it. And it's not a mystery. It just is to some people. And so I'm excited for you to see the film because I would talk to you again about it because there are some of these things that big things that you know to be true will come through in one line or one look or one scene. And it's interesting the way that you can approach this huge topic through, well, my film professor said, the way you want to tell a big story is through a small window. And I think that's what this does. It's not scientists in lab coats. It's not doctors explaining statistics on the screen. It's just the story of a couple people. And in doing that, by telling it through a small window, we tell a huge story.
Wow. And that's great advice to people that want to become storytellers of one kind or another, tell the big story through a small window.
That's right.
I got to think
Well, if
about that one.
anybody listens to this wants to make anything, film or otherwise, the if you're not telling secret, I think a comedian said, if you're not telling secrets, then you're wasting our time, right? So don't preach at us. Tell us your most personal, most true to you things that you see and understand. And with you, when you combine who you are with how you're raised, the things that you didn't choose that were around you, and then the things that you did choose, you've got a unique. You're an expert on things that you and I would never be, right? The person listening to this is an expert on who they are and what they know in ways that you and I could never speak or create or make something about it. And so if you can be vulnerable and honest and tell secrets, then that will resonate deeply with other people and they will see value in it. So, and it will do you the most good. It will do you the most good. I mean, you can paint a flower, great, but what is it? Why? What does it mean? What does it open up in you? How does it connect? And therefore you will stumble into, it takes practice, but you'll stumble into stories that change you and change the world. Is not an overstatement. It will change the people around you and therefore change the world.
Wow. Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's a great clip for aspiring artists who are, looking for, how to get out there and tell stories better. And that's really great advice. Thank you. So Jared Callahan, thank you for joining me today. This has been an incredible conversation, and I look forward to meeting with you again and having another conversation after I've gone and watched the film.
I appreciate it. And everybody who hears this, Clean Slate is, you can find it anywhere that you would find media. I think it's on Apple, Google, Amazon Prime, Tubi. You can buy it or rent it. It's very cheap, and we made it that way on purpose so that people would be able to access it. So watch the film, come back for our conversation about it, and share it with someone that you know would be changed by it as well. It's an honor. Thanks, Mark, for spending the time and for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Cheers.